Are still floating on the waves of Carnival 2017, even though it's been finished since midnight on Tuesday, the 28th of February. And that is a real issue because so many children did not go out to school this week. Some people did not go out to work this week, and they may not necessarily have arranged to have the time off with their bosses beforehand. And that's a problem for people like those who are members of the Employers Consultative Association. We want to say good morning to Mr. Neil Derrick, one of the directors of the ECA. Good morning to you, Mr. Derrick.
Good morning. Yes, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning
to you, and morning to Edison and Dr. Reed.
Good morning.
And morning to the national listenership.
I'm just thinking to myself, every year we have this, it's almost like a pilgrimage for some people, the Carnival pilgrimage, which may last about 2 weeks. And that is a great deal of productivity that goes out the window. Yeah?
Well, yes, I think it's something that we must look at. I don't think that it has to be, though. If I just to put this in context, I think from a national point, in business school we talk about all these pestle and steeple and all that. But those letters really is about the environmental evaluation. And it means that that S for social speaks to Carnival as part of our must be able to support it. My concern is the direction that we're going. And I say that to say, I heard a comment that was saying we should give the children 5 days off for the entire week. Now, if you take that as an example, we go to sport, saying that we're generating youth teams, youth cricket, youth football, they all improve in sports. We're not seeing school as the youth system for work. So when we take the children and carry them up to age 19, staying home for the entire week at Carnival, what do you think will happen when they get to the work scenario?
It's like they're being conditioned to accept that week.
Conditioned.
Mm-hmm.
You see, because I think what we have to do is build into our work design some way of being able to provide for that social love for Carnival. Carnival is an important aspect of Trinidad. It's an important aspect of the economy. If you look at the amount of foreign exchange it brings in, I think there's no tourist attraction or anything that PDC does that will bring more money than Carnival. So obviously we can't take that out of the equation from a national point of view. But we must be able to give consideration. I go back to when I was a lot younger. Not so many years ago, when I knew in the oil industry, we worked back on 2 Saturdays. So yes, you got the 2 Carnival days off. You had an opportunity to play mass, but you didn't lose productivity. You got back 2 days work because you actually worked on 2 Saturdays as compensatory days.
So how then should employers treat it? The make-up days before or after the Carnival, as the case might be? Or extend the Carnival Monday and Tuesday as national holidays, so there's no discrepancy again, and debate as the case might be, or no pay, no work, no pay.
Well, yeah, and I'm saying that we understand the fact that a Carnival exists. We understand the Trinidad culture of Carnival. We understand the need of Carnival as an economic vehicle for the Trinidad economy. So the employers must find a way to facilitate that. And you don't want it to become, you have 2 more holidays. You already have 14. That goes to 16. But there's nothing wrong with getting maybe additional days either up front, behind, right? Compensatory days that So maybe it could be traded for things like overtime. So when an employee works overtime, rather than they get pay, they put it forward to the Carnival. And those who don't want to do that maybe would lose their pay.
Mr. Derek, but you're not dealing only with the issue of Monday and Tuesday here. We're dealing with Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And more specifically, the Wednesday, the cool down conditioning day that we've been so conditioned as a culture to cool down on the Wednesday, Ash Wednesday.
Well, and that's where the problem is. Because you have persons who are now making this upon a Friday holiday. They're finding ways to take. And I think they're putting themselves at risk. Because obviously, in the sense of these provisions that people think are rights, right? Things like sick leave and other leaves like that are really provisions. They must have a trigger. So if you, for instance, say that you're sick and you take sick leave and the employer could show that you're not sick, the trigger disappears. Are rights, right? Things like sick leave, of these provisions and other leaves like that are really provisions. They must have a trigger that you're sick. So if you, for instance, say and you take sick leave and the employer could show that you're not sick, the trigger disappears. Are rights, leave, of these provisions and things like other leaves like that are really provisions that you're sick. So if you, for instance, say and you take sick leave and the employer could show that you're not sick, they must have a trigger. Are rights. Of these provisions and other leaves like that are things like sick, really provisions that you're sick. So if you, for instance, say and you take sick leave and the employer could show that you're not sick, they must have a trigger. Are rights, leave, of these provisions and the trigger disappears. Right? Things like sick, other leaves like that are that you're sick, really provision, and you take sick leave. So if you, for instance, say that you're not sick, and the employer could show, they must have a trigger. Leave, are rights, and of these provisions, right? Things like sick, the trigger disappears. That you're sick, really provision, and you take sick leave, other leaves like that are that you're not sick. So if you, for instance, say and the employer could show, they must have a trigger. Leave, are rights, and of these provisions, right? Things like sick, the trigger disappears. That you're sick, and you take sick leave. Really provision, other leaves like that are. So if you, for instance, say they must have a trigger, and the employer could show are rights, leave, and of these provisions, right? Things like sick, the trigger disappears. That you're sick, really provision, and you take sick leave, other leaves like that are. That you're not sick, they must have a trigger, and the employer could show are rights, leave. So if you, for instance, say and of these provisions, right? Things like sick, the trigger disappears. Really provision, and you take sick leave. That you're sick, that you're not sick, they must have a trigger. And the employer could show leave, are rights. So if you, for instance, say and of these provisions, right? Things like sick, the trigger disappears. Other leaves like that are really provisions, and you take sick leave. That you're not sick, that you're sick, they must have a trigger. And the employer could show a rights, please. And so if you, for instance, say of this provision, the trigger disappears. Other leaves like that are right? Things like sick, really provision that you're not sick and you take sick leave. They must have a trigger. And the employer could show a rights that you're sick. And please, of this provision. So if you, for instance, say the trigger disappears, other leaves like that are right? Things like sick that you're not sick. Really provision. They must have a trigger and you take sick leave. A rights that you're sick. And the employer could show and please of this provision. So if you, for instance, say the trigger disappears, other leaves like that are right? Things like sick that you're not sick. They must have a trigger and you take sick leave. A rights that you're sick. Really provision. And the employer could show leave of this provision. So if you, for instance, say other leaves like that are right? Things like sick. The trigger disappears that you're not sick. They must have a trigger and you take sick leave. A rights that you're sick. Really provision. And the employer could show of this provision, please. So if you, for instance, say other leaves like that are the trigger disappears. Right? Things like sick. They must have a trigger. A rights. And you take sick leave. Really provision that you're sick. And the employer could show of this provision, please. So if you, for instance, say other leaves like that are the trigger disappears. Right? Things like sick that you're not sick. They must have a trigger. A rights. Really provision. And you take sick leave. That you're sick. And the employer could show of this provision. So if you, for instance, say please other leaves like that are the trigger disappears that you're not sick. Right? Things like sick. They must have a trigger. A rights. Really provision that you're sick. And the employer could show. So if you, for instance, say please other leaves like that are of this provision that you're not sick. Right? Things like sick. The trigger disappears. A rights that you're sick. And really provision. And the employer could show. So if you, for instance, say please other leaves like that are of this provision, right? Things like sick that you're not sick. They must have a trigger and you take sick leave. A rights that you're sick. And really provision. And the employer could show. So if you, for instance, say the trigger disappears, please. Of this provision, right? Things like sick, other leaves like that are they must have a trigger and you take sick leave that you're not sick. That you're sick. A rights. And really provision. And the employer could show the trigger disappears, please. So if you, for instance, say of this provision, right? Things like sick, other leaves like that are they must have a trigger and you take sick leave that you're not sick. A rights that you're sick. And really provision. And the employer could show the trigger disappears, please. So if you, for instance, say of this provision, right? Things like sick, other leaves like that. They must have a trigger, and you take sick leave that you're not sick. All right, that you're sick, and really provision, and the employer could show leave, the trigger disappears. So if you, for instance, say, right, things like sick of these provision, they must have a trigger, and you take sick leave. All right, that you're not sick, that you're sick, and really provision, and the employer could show the trigger disappears. Leave. Right, things like sick of these provision. So if you, for instance, say they must have a trigger, and you take sick leave. All right, that you're not sick, that you're sick, and the employer could show the trigger disappears. Leave. Really provision, other leaves like that. Of these provision. So if you, for instance, say, right, things like sick, and you take sick leave. All right, that you're not sick, that you're sick, they must have a trigger, and the employer could show leave, the trigger disappears. Really provision, other leaves like that. Of these provision. So if you, for instance, say, right, things like sick, and you take sick leave. All right, that you're sick, they must have a trigger, and the employer could show leave, the trigger disappears. Really provision, and other leaves like that. Of these provision. So if you, for instance, say, and you take sick leave, right, things like sick. All right, that you're sick, they must have a trigger, that you're not sick, and the employer could show the trigger disappears. Really provision, leave, other leaves like that. Of these provision. So if you, for instance, say, and you take sick leave, right, things like sick. All right, they must have a trigger, that you're sick, that you're not sick, and the trigger disappears. Really provision, and the employer could show other leaves like that. Of these provision. So if you, for instance, say, and you take sick leave, right, things like sick. All right, they must have a trigger, that you're not sick, that you're sick, and the trigger disappears. Really provision, and the employer could show other leaves like that. Of these provision, and you take sick leave. So if you, for instance, say, right, things like sick. All right, they must have a trigger, that you're not sick, that you're sick, and the trigger disappears. Leave, and the employer could show other leaves like that. Of these provision, and you take sick leave. So if you, for instance, say, right, things like sick, they must have a trigger. All right, that you're not sick, that you're sick, and really provision, the trigger disappears, and the employer could show leave, other leaves like that. Of these provision, and you take sick leave. So if you, for instance, say, right, things like sick, that you're not sick. All right, that you're sick, and they must have a trigger. The trigger disappears, and the employer could show really provision, leave, other leaves like that. Of these provision, and you take sick leave. So if you, for instance, say, all right, and that you're sick, they must have a trigger, and the employer could show really provision, leave, other leaves like that. The trigger disappears. Of these provision, that you're not sick, and you take sick leave. right? Things like sick. So if you, for instance, say are rights and that you're sick, they must have a trigger, and the employer could show leave, really provision, other leaves like that. The trigger disappears. Of these provisions that you're not sick and you take sick leave, right? Things like sick. So if you, for instance, say are rights and that you're sick, they must have a trigger, and the employer could show leave, really provision. The trigger disappears. Other leaves like that. Of these provisions that you're not sick and you take sick leave, right? Things like sick are rights. So if you, for instance, say and they must have a trigger that you're sick, and the employer could show really provision leave, the trigger disappears. Other leaves like that. Of these provisions that you're not sick and you take sick leave, right? Things like sick are rights. So if you, for instance, say and that you're sick and the employer could show leave, the trigger disappears. Other leaves like that. That you're not sick and you take sick leave, right? Things like sick are rights. So if you, for instance, say and of these provisions and the employer could show that you're sick, the trigger disappears. Leave, other leaves like that. That you're not sick. So if you, for instance, say are rights and of these provisions and the employer could show that you're sick, right? Things like sick leave, the trigger disappears. Other leaves like that. So if you, for instance, say are rights and of these provisions and the employer could show that you're sick, right? Things like sick leave, the trigger disappears. Other leaves like that. That you're not sick. So if you, for instance, say and are rights of these provisions and the employer could show right? Things like sick leave, that you're sick. Other leaves like that. The trigger disappears and you take sick leave. So if you, for instance, say that you're not sick and are rights, really provision. Of these provisions and the employer could show right? Things like sick leave, that you're sick. Other leaves like that. The trigger disappears. So if you, for instance, say that you're not sick and are rights, really provision, and you take sick leave. Of these provisions and the employer could show right? Things like sick leave, that you're sick. Other leaves like that. So if you, for instance, say that you're not sick and are rights, really provision, the trigger disappears. Of these provisions and the employer could show and you take sick leave. Leave, right? Things like sick, that you're sick. So if you, for instance, say that you're not sick and really provision are rights, the trigger disappears. Of these provisions and the employer could show and you take sick leave. Leave, right? Things like sick, other leaves like that. That you're sick. So if you, for instance, say that you're not sick and really provision, the trigger disappears. Are rights. Of these provisions and the employer could show and you take sick leave. Leave, other leaves like that. Right? Things like sick, that you're sick. So if you, for instance, say that you're not sick, and really provision are rights, the trigger disappears. Of this provision, and the employer could show leave, things like sick, other leaves like that are that you're sick, that you're not sick. So if you, for instance, say and really provision are rights, the trigger disappears. Of this provision, and the employer could show leave, and you take sick leave, things like sick, other leaves like that are that you're sick, that you're not sick. So if you, for instance, say and really provision are rights, the trigger disappears. Of this provision, and the employer could show leave, and you take sick leave, things like sick, other leaves like that are that you're sick. So if you, for instance, say and that you're not sick, really provision, the trigger disappears. Are rights. Of this provision, and the employer could show, and you take sick leave, things like sick, other leaves like that are leaves that you're sick. So if you, for instance, say that you're not sick, really provision, the trigger disappears. Of this provision, and the employer could show are rights, and you take sick leave, things like sick leaves that you're sick. So if you, for instance, say other leaves like that that you're not sick, really provision, the trigger disappears, and are rights, and the employer could show, and you take sick leave, things like sick leaves that you're sick. So if you, for instance, say other leaves like that that you're not sick, the trigger disappears. Really provision. Of this provision, and the employer could show are rights, and you take sick leave, things like sick leaves that you're sick. So if you, for instance, say other leaves like that that you're not sick, the trigger disappears. Really provision, and the employer could show of this provision are rights, things like sick leaves that you're sick, other leaves like that that you're not sick. So if you, for instance, say the trigger disappears. Really provision, and the employer could show of this provision, and you take sick leave are rights,